A few weeks ago, I was lying in my bed trying to get to sleep, and I was running through my to-do list in my mind. This talk came up as one of my things to do, and I suddenly got filled with nerves and butterflies. And I actually got up and started writing this talk at like 1 a.m. I was trying to break down why I was feeling nervous. Okay, so I was giving a TED talk in under 2 weeks, and I hadn't written it, but you know, it can be dealt with. It's here, it's happening. I also was giving a talk in front of a large group of people, but you know, listen to a Beyonce song before you go on stage, and that can also be dealt with. It wasn't this. There was something else. There was a small, niggling fear which I had pushed down because I was embarrassed to admit it. It was because I was giving a talk on the subject of everyday sexism. Feminism. That's what it was. I, Natasha Waddell, a young woman, was scared to come out here and tell you all that I am a feminist. Why was I scared of this? Why was I scared of telling you I believe in the social, economic, and political equality of the sexes? It wasn't out of fear of my own safety. I'm lucky enough to live in a society where, as a woman, I can have an education, I can go to university, and I can lend my voice to this discussion. It was rather a social fear. Would people think I was weird? Would people think I was humorless? Would people think I had no sense of fun? My journey to being on this stage began last summer when I picked up a copy of Laura Bates's book, Everyday Sexism. It's been a worldwide hit, and I think it has been a hit for the same reasons that I really enjoyed it. I think a lot of women found that when they were reading it, things that they have ignored, pushed down, brushed off, were finally being vocalized. And I wasn't the only one that felt like this. I want to just explain what I mean by everyday sexism, and I find a helpful way to do this is to tell you about my night out the other night, and to give you two versions of the same story. So there's the first version, which is that I got dressed, I walked to Tesco, got my alcohol, went to my pre-drinks, went out, danced, and then went home. But there's another way of telling the same story. I get dressed, but not too dressed up, because I don't want my outfit to be an invitation. I walked to Tesco, and Wolf whistled on the way there, and when I'm in the aisles, I have to avoid certain ones because, wait, is that guy following me? I walk to my prees and have to cross the road on the way there because there's a group of guys walking towards me, shouting and leering. I go out and have to avoid drunken sexual advances, and I walk home having had to sober up so I can hear whether footsteps are following or passing. Now, why wouldn't I tell you that version of the story? Recently, I found that if I tried to talk about everyday sexism and feminism, I met with one of a few reactions. Either I'm ignored, people become bored and their eyes glaze over, or sometimes I'm mocked and embarrassed for what I believe. And other times, and actually this is the most common thing, other times people act as if what I've just told them is normal. They act as if these minor adjustments that I have to make every day in my life mean nothing because they're tiny compared to bigger things at stake. Why does it matter if I have to wear jeans rather than a skirt on a night out? Why does it matter that I have to turn down my music so I can hear footsteps? Why does it matter that I have to hold keys between my fists when I'm walking home? Why is that normal? Maybe it's because it is. Maybe it's because that's being a girl. Or maybe it's because we're taught that it's normal. Every time one of my female friends tells me a story about everyday sexism, they end it by saying, oh, but that's just normal, we can't do anything about it. There's no point complaining because it's just normal, it's minor. Actually, the other night, my friend was at an event and this guy came up to her and he totally seriously asked her if he could follow her around for the whole evening. She was really unnerved and quite shocked by this. And she actually asked me to include this in my talk, but at the time she'd had to act as if it was a normal, if irritating, part of her night. I first encountered this when I was 14, and I was walking home from school in my uniform, and this guy shouted at me, this male adult stranger shouted at me from across the street, "Put a smile on that pretty face." It sounds so cringe to say what he said out loud, but rather than smiling, I put my head down and walked a bit quicker than before. I got home and I told my sister about this encounter, and she told me to send it in to holler back. Holler back is a movement that encourages women to holler back at these men by submitting their stories online. And they recently released a statistic saying that by the age of 14, 67% of young women have experienced street harassment. 14. I hadn't even picked my GCSEs. And actually, there was this little jingle going around school at the time, and you might recognize this if you went to school in the mid-noughties. It went something like, Don't touch me there, that's my private square. But I was starting to understand that because I was a woman, my personal square was up for grabs. Because I was a woman, I was suddenly fair play for comments, jokes, and playful teasing that I just didn't find funny. And for the last 6 years, this has continued. I've learned to ignore it. I've learned to get on with my life, but it hasn't stopped. It's always been there. But sometimes it's easier not to kick up a fuss. For example, I was at a pre-drinks last year. I'm making it sound like I drink a lot. I was at a pre-drinks last year, and it was me and 2 of my other female friends and several of our guy friends. We sat and we chatted and we ate, and we talked about things like sport, deadlines, and where we were going to go to the Beacon or the main bar. And then suddenly, one of the guys stopped. He looked me and my friend up and down, and while licking the last orange dust off his monster munchy fingers, he posed this question to the females of the room. To the guys of the room, not the females of the room. Who would you rather shag, her or her? Pointing to me and my friend, the third girl having been disqualified from whatever competition this was because her boyfriend was right next to her. I was overcome with 3 feelings when I was asked this question. Firstly, I was angry. I was angry that this guy felt he could make a comment like that directly to my face, and at university in 2016, I was still being patronized like this. But secondly, I had these feelings of embarrassment and self-consciousness. Like, did I look hot? Like, was I shaggable? Like, what if he didn't pick me? I hope he picks me. Like, God, does no one want to shag me? But lastly, I felt disappointed. I was disappointed that I'd caught myself thinking those thoughts. I was disappointed in the situation, I was disappointed in him, and most importantly, and most depressingly, I was disappointed in myself. I knew I was worth more than my shagability. Of course I was. But the worst part was I had no outlet for my rage. If I'd said something, I would have ruined the fun, I would have been a killjoy. So I was left with one option: to be silent. I pushed down all my intrinsic beliefs. It was boys being boys, it was locker room chat. They didn't mean it, it was just a joke, it was normal. I actually recounted this story to a few of my female friends recently, and I got quite angry and riled when I was saying it. But what surprised me was their reaction. They didn't encourage me to go and stand up to the guy. They told me to be quiet. They told me to calm down. They told me to be silent. Silence. Silence to avoid embarrassment, silence to avoid kicking up a fuss, silence to prevent anything from changing. And I think it's time to break this silence, and I think it's time to end this crippling fear of embarrassment. But it's not only fear of embarrassment that stops people from talking about everyday sexism. There's also this idea that if you don't laugh along with everyday sexism, you suddenly become puritanical or unsexy, boring, or not worth an invite to a party. Actually, the other night, this guy specifically told me that he wasn't going to get with me because I was a feminist. As if he might catch it off me. I mean, it's a belief in equality, it's not a disease, you know? When people challenge the established order, it pushes people out of their comfort zone, and it scares people. I mean, if you ever want someone to stop hitting on you in a bar, tell them you're a feminist, and I think he'll run for the hills. But perhaps university is partially to blame for this. We're all young, and we're all trying to fit in, and no one wants to not be in on the banter or out of the joke. At a lot of UK universities, actually, there exist these all-male drinking clubs, and ask any student at any UK university, and they will have a story to tell you that might be a bit similar to this one, that the guys invite girls as their dates to dinners, and as the girls walk in, they're judged on their attractiveness. And if some of the male club members don't think one of the girls is hot enough to be there, the ugly girl's date has to down his bottle of wine. This isn't made explicit, but I think she'll know why her date is a bit drunker than everyone else's. But maybe university is actually a positive place to explore this stuff. I actually found that my sort of feminist awakening happened when I got to university and I started challenging everyday sexism. I've been at an all-girls school my whole life, and I was always taught that I was valuable, that I was equal, that I could say and do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. I could never have imagined that my gender would make me a joke. And when I discovered this culture of women constantly being the butt of people's jokes, I was shocked. And I was even more shocked to find out that it is constantly excused as being harmless, laddish banter. But how harmless is this? There was a study done in 2015 that found that 1 in 3 female students are sexually assaulted on their own campus during their time at university. I mean, is it too much of a logical leap to suggest that us ignoring and being silent about these small acts of everyday sexism is actually feeding this more sinister culture where sexual harassment and assault goes all too frequently unreported? Everyday sexism is not trivial. It is a symbol of a more toxic culture, a culture which forces us to be silent about the small things, and who's to say that we won't be silent about the big ones too? I think it's time for a new conversation to begin, to break this silence and to have a conversation which is not drowned out. This breakthrough is already happening. The Feminist Society at St Andrews, where these conversations happen regularly, is thriving, and Laura Bates's Everyday Sexism project has provided an outlet for over 100,000 women to give entries and stories about acts of everyday sexism. And even on a smaller level, at the TEDx launch back in November, I gave a short version of this talk, and after it, my friend's boyfriend turned to her and he said, "Have you ever experienced this?" When she responded saying, yes, every single day, he was shocked and appalled, and he's changed his actions and responses since. It's not called everyday sexism for nothing. It's relentless, it's tiring, and it's frustrating to think that you are worth less because of your gender. There is a conversation there, but this is an opportunity for a new beginning. There is awareness, but there is more to be done. There are still no feminist studies available at St Andrews, and none of the guys who I've mentioned in any of my stories are sitting here today, listening to this. There's this quote by the actor Lily Tomlin, and I think it sums this up quite well. She says that, I always thought that somebody should do something about that. Then I realized I am somebody. Everyone has the opportunity to spread this message. As was mentioned in the introduction, me and my friend recently started a publication called Lips magazine. It's an online publication, and it's to encourage women to talk about these experiences of everyday sexism and generally sort of talk about what it's like being a young woman at university today. It's successful, but it's very difficult to get people talking about this stuff. This is why this talk is necessary, because we need to get a conversation started. And sometimes these conversations have unusual outcomes. I was walking home from another night out, God, mum and dad, sorry. I bumped into this guy who was on his way home from a rugby social, and as you can imagine from a conversation at 2 a.m. in the middle of the street, we got to the profound quite quickly. We ended up talking about everyday sexism, and it took him about 10 minutes of me convincing him that none of his friends were going to hear and that no one was behind him, and while he was still turning his head to check, he finally came out with the words, "Yeah, I guess I am a feminist, actually." I strongly believe that everyone can embrace this realization. This is not a blame game. It's a call to the students of St Andrews to start a conversation that moves away from viewing everyday sexism with a suspicious and an aggressive view and make it about unity and equality. I was nervous about coming up here and giving this talk, but if it means that at least one of you walks out of this room feeling more empowered to talk about sexism than you did when you walked in, it was definitely worth it. And I actually have a little 3-step guide to help you on this journey. Firstly, notice it. Notice the catcalls. Notice the wolf whistles. And notice when the jokes stop being funny. Second, upstand and don't collude with the idea that it's normal. And thirdly, discuss it. Talk about it, have a chat about it whenever you get the chance. Because I'm interested in ending everyday sexism, and I'm passionate about getting young people talking about it. It's time to break the silence and have a new beginning and a new conversation, because your personal square is not up for grabs. Thank you.